So we have had quite a few bank holidays recently, so I haven't done a live in a long time, so it's nice to be back here doing a live for you. Hopefully you can all hear me okay, so if you can't, just let me know. Tonight we'll be debunking common myths that we see in physiotherapy that can often lead to a lot of misinformation. So I'll give it another couple of minutes for everyone to jump on and then we can get going. About 3 of you have joined, excellent. Let me know if you can hear me okay, hopefully you can. Any issues, let me know. Great, well we'll get going. We've got a few of you that have joined. So when we have lots of myths surrounding anything, whether that be physiotherapy or exercising in general, that often leads to a lot of confusion. And that confusion then means that people don't seek the help and advice that they need necessarily. Maybe they don't get it soon enough. Or a lot of the time people end up in this position of almost like analysis paralysis where they don't know what to do because they're hearing so many different things. So what I want to do today is just debunk some of those myths for you in the hopes of helping with a little bit of that confusion that you might have. So I'm going to go through the common ones that I tend to see quite a lot. So the first one is that pain is always an indication of injury severity. And that's not the case at all actually, because sometimes you can have an injury that isn't very bad but hurts a lot. Think for example if you've ever had a paper cut, you know it's not a bad injury but it actually does hurt quite a bit. And other times you can have injuries that are very, really aren't that painful at all but actually are quite bad. So an example of this would be a stress fracture. Generally that builds up slowly over time and initially you're not going to get much pain with that, but eventually that can cause you to have big issues. The other really interesting thing that we see is, for example, with Achilles ruptures, is that when we're looking at tendon pain in general, people that have pain in their tendons, when we look at their MRI scans, often there isn't a link between how much pain someone is experiencing and the images that we see on the MRI scans. Some people will have quite bad MRI scans but not much pain, and other people will have MRI scans that don't look too bad but have lots of pain. And this is when it can lead to people having Achilles ruptures, for example, because they don't have much pain but actually have had a tendon that's been there and been damaged. So pain is definitely not an indication of severity, and pain is actually just an experience. It's just warning us that there might be damage here. It doesn't mean that there definitely is damage there. So it doesn't always correlate necessarily to severity. And if, for example, with sunburn, you get sunburn, it's really painful, you go in a warm shower and it causes you pain, but you know that that pain isn't making the sunburn worse, but you're still feeling that pain. And that's the same thing with exercises with physio. Sometimes we'll give you things that might cause you a little bit of pain. It doesn't mean that injury is being made worse because you're feeling more pain, so it doesn't mean it's more severe. It's just that sometimes we're kind of waking up what's already there as well. So that is our first myth debunked. Pain is not always an indicator of injury severity. So our second myth is that rest is the best treatment for sports injuries or any injury. That is absolutely not the case at all. So if we're resting when we've got an injury, what we're often going to see actually is increased stiffness at that joint and in that area. Often increased pain over time as well, and the big one is weakness. So all the muscles in that area are going to get weaker and weaker if they're not being trained and not being used. So for example, I tend to see, I don't know what it is, but lots of hamstring injuries that people come in with that they haven't rehabilitated. What they tend to do is they have a hamstring injury, they rest, they go back out and play sport, it happens again, and then they seek physio help. And it's in that period of rest where physically they might have been feeling a bit better, it wasn't causing them as much pain, but actually what was happening was that muscle was getting weaker over time and not stronger. So you've already got a weakness in that muscle because you've torn it. You've then torn that muscle, you then let it get weaker, and then you go out again and expect it to be okay, and it's not. It then tears again. Often I will say to people with a very acute injury, so if you've suddenly rolled your ankle, if you've hurt your knee, if you've torn a muscle, the first kind of 48, 72 hours, keep it fairly low key. So don't be doing too many exercises. Generally rest, try and compress the area if you can, sort of keep it elevated. But outside of that window, that 48 to 72 hour window, I would then be looking to immediately start getting people exercising, obviously in a controlled manner, again after that. What we sometimes end up with as well is this pain cycle for people where they have pain, so they stop exercising. So they get stiff, the stiffness causes them pain, so they stop exercising, and we end up in this circle. So often actually rest is the worst thing you can do, and if you just continue to exercise in some way, manner or form, that's often going to help break that cycle for people, and then they're going to be in less pain overall. So that's something that is really key to kind of be looking at, and that's where physiotherapy is great, because we can be advising you on the exact exercises that you should be doing. Often it needs to be targeted and specific exercises for that area in order to be able to help them. So that brings us to our next myth. Ice should be used for all sports injuries. So I'm sure you've seen in football they run on with their magic sponge, or you hear someone say, oh, just whack an ice pack on it, that'll be fine. It's going to help with the inflammation. So ice doesn't help with inflammation at all, because to be able to get the tissue temperature, say for example I've hurt my bicep muscle, in order to get that tissue temperature down low enough to change the inflammation, I would actually have to give an ice burn to the skin. I wouldn't be able to get the bicep cool enough to change the metabolic rate of the tissue, which would reduce the inflammation. However, what ice does do is where you've got acute pain, it can help with that pain. So I don't say to people don't use ice, I just say don't use ice with the expectation it's going to reduce your inflammation. Use ice because you're in a bit of pain and you think it's going to help. And sometimes actually heat is better if that's the case. Not necessarily for an acute injury, a sudden ankle roll or that kind of thing, but if you've had like a sudden muscle spasm and your neck's quite sore, sometimes heat's better for that. Again, we're not reducing any inflammation. All we're doing is using it as a means of pain relief. So that's where ice can be really beneficial, but it's not really promoting healing in any way, is what I would say to that. So should ice be used for all sports injuries? Yes, for pain, no for inflammation. And then our next one is you should always avoid exercise if you have a sports injury. So sort of like we mentioned before about the rest, similar with this, but the other thing is some people rest entirely and don't kind of exercise at all with an injury. So what we're always trying to do as physiotherapists is get you exercising as much as possible. So by that, what I mean is even if you come into me with a stress fracture in your foot, so I obviously can't get you running, jumping, doing any activity through your foot for that initial period of time, but I'm going to make sure that I'm keeping your fitness up, because let's say you play a sport like squash, I'm going to keep your fitness up by getting you to do maybe a seated ski leg, for example, or maybe I'm going to get you doing an assault bike but without one of the legs. Whatever it is that I can do to keep your fitness up, I'm going to do. I'm still going to keep up with all of your core work, so lots of your abdominal work to make sure that's keeping nice and strong. If it's a lower body issue, I'm going to be getting your upper body exercising. And then if it is a lower body issue, even if it is a stress fracture, the good side I'm going to be working because I want to keep that strong. But also there is good research to show that you get contralateral improvement. So if my injured side is my right side and I'm training my left side, I actually get some motor skill improvement on the right side just by training the left side. So that's why I always get people to continue to exercise. And often as well, even with the really bad injuries where people aren't meant to be moving, they're not meant to be kind of doing much to that area, we can still train some of the smaller intrinsic muscles in that area, and often as well keeping the active range of movement going. So if I've got a stress fracture in my foot, there's no reason I can't take that boot off and just be stretching the foot up and down, in and out, that kind of thing, and doing some basic exercises with the foot that aren't weight bearing, so I'm still creating movement in that area as well. So that's the kind of things that we will be looking at. It's very, very rare that someone comes into my clinic and I turn around and say to them, no, you're not to exercise, you're not to move at all. I can't even think of an occasion where I've said just do absolutely nothing. I'm here to facilitate you in doing as much as you possibly can, and that's when it's really good to seek a professional opinion, because we can guide you into exactly what that should be and how much you can keep doing. And also some people have active jobs as well. You might hurt your shoulder playing tennis, but you're actually a gardener, so you still need to be able to garden. And that's one of the things that, you know, I can help guide you on as well, and so can everyone else that works here too. So our next myth is surgery is always necessary for sports injuries. So surgery is necessary in some cases, but it's really interesting now, all the research that is coming out actually, with regards to when we do and when we don't need surgery. So previously, a lot of shoulder injuries, particularly sort of impingement-like injuries or rotator cuff-related shoulder pain, would have, or tears as well, tendon tears in the shoulder, would have been treated with surgery. And now, more and more research is actually showing that not treating them with surgery, leaving it up to the physios, that's our specialism, means that we can just manage it conservatively, because we get very similar results whether we have the surgery or we don't have the surgery. And obviously there's way more risks in having the surgery than there is with physio. You know, as soon as you're, and I know we've actually got a surgeon that's on the call right now as well, on the live, you know, as soon as you're taking someone under anaesthetic, there is unfortunately a risk of death. And if you're also going to be cutting through tissues, there is a risk that they might damage a nerve in that process as well. So, you know, the risks of surgery are much higher than just conservative physio management alone when we're looking at sports injuries, if we're able to do it without surgical input. The other thing is ACL injuries, so at our knee, which you might hear quite a lot of happen in football, netball, rugby, those kind of things. So previously that was always operated on kind of immediately as soon as we could. And actually now we're saying, regardless of age or what someone wants to get back to doing, we're more looking at their function. So if we're rehabilitating someone and they're not getting any loss of control at their knee, so it's not suddenly buckling or giving way, then we are managing them conservatively and we're not putting them through an operation for ACL. Again, we've got the risk of going into surgery. We also need to replace that ACL with something, and we have three options generally that we use. One is either your own hamstring tendon, which in my opinion isn't that smart, because if you've injured your ACL, sometimes that's because you're a bit hamstring deficient, and now we're going to make you more hamstring deficient by taking one of them to use as your ACL. We can use your patellar tendon as a graft, but again we've then effectively damaged the patellar tendon and we have to then rehab that afterwards. Or you can have a cadaver graft, but that isn't done that commonly. So there are our three options that we have, but all of which are obviously very invasive. So if we can avoid that, then that's great. What I think we'll see is we won't see a shift with the professional teams happening anytime soon. And having worked in professional teams, I can understand why, because if we have someone that ruptures their ACL on a Sunday, we get them seen by a consultant and MRI'd on a Monday, we get them operated on a Wednesday, we know from that point onwards that they're probably going to be back within 9 months. We know that they're going to be back playing within 9 months. They pretty much lost the season, but they're going to be back afterwards. The issue with the conservative management is obviously that we can rehab them, maybe we're rehabbing them for 6 months, and then they're getting this loss of control still, and then they have to go for surgery, and so it prolongs the process. So that's why I can't see it happening in a professional environment. But for most other people where they come into clinic and they're being managed by the NHS, they don't have private healthcare, my argument to you is you're going to have to wait at least 6 months anyway to be seen by a consultant, to have an MRI, to be seen by a consultant again, to then have surgery. So let's just rehab your knee or whatever area it is and just see where we get to. And if we get to a really good point, when it comes up for surgery, you can just say, actually, I don't need that now, you can give it to someone else. And if you do need it, then you need it. So yeah, that's why sort of surgery isn't always necessary for sports injuries, and there is so much more research coming out now supporting that physiotherapy should absolutely be the first port of call that we do. One of the injuries that I would say is necessary for surgery is with traumatic shoulder dislocations. For anyone below, I believe, the age of 24, 25, the guidance is that we should be operating on them straight away, because it's got a 99% chance of happening again if we don't. So in an example like that, then yeah, I would recommend surgery for things like that. But generally, physio is going to be your first option. Then our next myth that we're going to be debunking is you should always push through pain when exercising. Yes and no. I think if you know your body really well, so I've been training for a long time, I've been in the gym for 10 years, I've exercised my entire life. I know the difference in the gym between that muscle ache that I'm working it hard and injury pain. If you're getting injury pain, that's when you're like, no, I need to stop, I'm in the gym, I should not be pushing it. If you're getting that muscle ache pain, that's okay. But pain is essentially your body's way of signaling that something either is wrong or something might be wrong. So if you're ignoring genuine pain and you're pushing through it, that can lead to further injury and eventually prolong your recovery process as well. So it's important to kind of listen to your body too, because it's very easy to just push through when you're on a sports field or sprinting, whatever it might be, and just wanting to kind of get to the end. But actually, a lot of the time that's going to be doing more harm than good for you, because you're going to end up in a position where initially when you first felt that pain, it was very mild injury. Now that you've carried on and finished that game, finished that race, whatever it is, it's much worse, and that's going to take a lot longer to sort out. So pushing through pain isn't always good. The other area I would say where we do want to push through pain a bit is when we have a tendon injury, for example. We likely will get a little bit of pain when we're exercising or when we're doing our physio-targeted exercises. And the reason for that is to get significant changes in the tendon, we need to be working at 70% upwards of our max strength. So that's obviously quite a lot. So that's quite a lot of load in the tendon, so that then might mean that we do elicit a little bit of pain in that tendon. But what we say to people is this pain should be discomfort rather than agonising pain. And this pain should dissipate within an hour or so after you cease exercising. If that pain is still there, for a few hours afterwards or the next day, you probably have aggravated it a bit. Doesn't mean you've made the injury worse, but you might have just annoyed it a little bit as well. So, push through pain to a certain extent. Great, now on to our next myth. Sports injuries only happen to professional athletes. Well, obviously that's not the case, because I know a lot of you on this call have had injuries, and that's why you're part of this group, and you're recreational athletes as well. So sports injuries really can happen to everyone, and although professional athletes get to have physio on tap pretty much, I would still advise anyone to get help immediately, because often that means that my recommendations are going to be much shorter and also cost you less money, because you're not going to see me for as long. The sooner that you do it, the longer you leave it, generally the longer everything's going to take and the longer you're out of action for. Our next myth is I should only see a physiotherapist if I have a sports injury. So we get this quite a lot from, we do advertising on Facebook and Instagram. Some of you on this call might be wondering how you found us. And we have some people messaging us saying, no, you're not right for me because you're a physio, you only deal with sports injuries. I need to see an osteo or a chiro, for example. And it's like, no, we help people with sports injuries, and if we can get someone back to playing, rugby at a really high level or football back to a high level, I can get you back to being able to walk your dog 500 metres around the park. It's the same thing, it's just on a slightly different scale. So for any musculoskeletal problems, a physiotherapist should be someone that you look to first, or a sports therapist, as someone that can help. And having done degrees in both, I feel like sports therapists are the absolute people you should be seeing if you've got any kind of musculoskeletal injury. Good, and then onto our last one. Sports drinks are always necessary for hydration during exercise. So sports drinks are really good for replacing the electrolytes that we've lost. So our electrolytes are our salts, our sugars, our potassium from exercising, and sort of our carbohydrates during prolonged intense exercise, but they're not always necessary for hydration, having the sports drinks. For most people, water will be enough, particularly if you've eaten that day. I think as well it depends how much you're sweating during that training session. So for example, I find when I play netball inside, it's normally warmer and I normally sweat way more than I do outside. And I often find then even if I drink loads of water, I still often end up with a bit of a headache, and I still feel dehydrated and I still want to drink more water. But if I have had a sports drink or an electrolyte tablet that I put in my water, that does help that. So I think you've got to monitor the situation. Is it really hot outside where you're training, or are you indoors, like my example of netball? And do you often find that you struggle to replace those electrolytes, and what's your diet like? So for me, I know that my diet is quite low in salt, and actually probably needs to be a little bit higher, particularly on those days I'm sweating a lot. So that's another way that you can replace your electrolytes as well. So I hope you enjoyed sort of that whistle-stop tour through our myths that I have just debunked. There's lots of misconceptions about sports injuries and physio and injuries in general and their treatment. So I'm hoping that to help educate you guys, I can help empower you to make informed decisions about your injury management in the future. So if you've got any questions about anything I've said today, then please just drop me a message now. If of course you've got any injuries or you're wanting help with anything, then again, either comment on here, drop me a message, and I'll see what we can do to help as well. But I'll stay on for another minute or so in case we've got any questions or comments. Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to sign off. Have a lovely evening, guys, and an excellent week. Thank you. Bye.